Good morning, everyone, afternoon and evening. I think it's morning for everyone except for Ritha. I'm Clara Aleman and welcome to this webinar of the Prevention Collaborative. I'm delighted to have with us today two exceptional practitioners in the field of gender transformative and violence prevention, Doris Bartel and Ritha Nyiratunga, who I will introduce in a minute. So this webinar will present and share key insights from one of the latest practice briefs on training and mentoring community facilitators to lead critical reflection groups for preventing violence against women. This was compiled by Doris Bartel from our review of the literature and extensive discussions with experts in training community facilitators such as Ritha, who's here with us, for programs such as SASA, Program Age, and Indisha Kirwa, among others. So we think it's very important that these briefs that the collaborative is producing are grounded in practical experiences and applications for our community of practice. We are all aware, and we've discussed a lot, how transforming harmful gender norms that are driving violence against women and girls through promoting critical reflections in groups on gender and power is a key component of effective interventions to prevent it. But we all have different understandings and experiences of what this actually looks like on the ground and how it can be done. So this webinar and today we have an opportunity to discuss how and why these critical reflection groups are important to our work in violence prevention, and to exchange experiences among ourselves and practical tips on what we found and what the evidence or practice-based experience says that works best to recruit, train, and support community facilitators to lead these discussions on gender and power, as they have this key role in the process. So with no further ado, I want to introduce Doris Bartel. She has over 25 years of experience designing and implementing programs to prevent gender-based violence and to promote gender equality. Doris currently works with NGOs, international donors, academics, clinicians, and grassroots activists as a researcher, strategic advisor, trainer, and facilitator to plan, implement, and evaluate programs for positive social change. And Ritha Nyiratunga is an experienced gender and development practitioner based in Rwanda who has worked extensively in gender transformative programming to promote gender equality and violence prevention with a focus on engaging men and boys. She worked for the Rwanda Men's Resource Center, managing the Women Empowerment Program for over 6 years, and has taken an active role in adapting a range of models to prevent violence. So thank you enormously to both of you being here with us. I know Ritha has a bit of a sore throat, so feel free, Ritha, to tell us when maybe you've had enough and to share all that you feel good while you feel good. So the sequences that Doris will present, the main insights from the practice brief she compiled. Ritha will illustrate some of these based on her experience, mostly within the Shikirwa. We will then, so this will be around 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. We will then have a time for clarification questions, around 20 minutes, and then half an hour for discussion. Doris, I'll pass the Zoom, the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure for me to have been a part of this process and to participate in this webinar. Thanks for the invitation, and great to share some of the findings here with you today. Let's see, I have control over these slides, I hope. Okay, it's not working. I wonder how I can get that to advance. There we go. Apologies for that. So I was asked by the Prevention Collaborative to conduct a research and to write the practice brief on this topic, as Clara just mentioned. So this past spring, I conducted both a literature review of the published and the gray literature about critical reflection groups and what works, and any evaluations of facilitator training methods, And I also conducted key informant interviews with expert trainers who are experienced in training facilitators of such groups to delve into the accumulated wisdom of practice-based evidence. So in this webinar, we'll go over the highlights of the research about what we know about training and supporting facilitators to lead such critical reflection groups. Keep in mind the time we have available is limited, and the sampling of the rich diversity of experiences from across the globe is large, so we'll just be getting a smidgen of what the full spectrum of results was. I learned so much from the many experts that contributed to the practice-based lessons and insights, and really thrilled that Ritha, who contributed her experience, is able to be on the line as well. And Erin, thank you for your contributions as well. She's on the line as well. The ideas and suggestions in this presentation are just really a starting point for the Prevention Collaborative. I'm on a learning journey here and would really appreciate the insights and ideas from all of you to shape the ways forward on this topic. One key insight from me as a result of this research is that there is a relative lack of research within the field of GBV on what works to train facilitators of critical reflection groups. And it's a gap I'd be keen to see filled in the future, and would love to hear from you and work with any of you who might be wanting to design some future research on this topic. So let's talk about that at the end. In terms of our agenda today, we're going to talk about some definitions about what we mean by critical reflection groups, so we're all on the same page. Look through some program examples, and look carefully at what we mean by successful outcomes. And I'm really interested in your feedback on this question. The bulk of this webinar will review the findings from the issues we should consider when recruiting and training community facilitators to lead the discussions, what types of mentoring, support, and feedback are needed. And throughout, we'll hear from Ritha with some examples from her experience in Rwanda. And at the end, we'll have some time for some additional considerations, as well as the Q&A and some discussion. So we wanted to start with a definition of critical reflection discussion groups, which is facilitated sessions that focus on questioning the assumptions and beliefs of power and privilege based on past experience. The role of the facilitator is probably the most important element for success, the pivot point, and that's why we're focusing on the role of the facilitator in this webinar. The role of the facilitator is to ask people to reflect on their own life experiences, to pose questions that help people articulate their own values and challenge their own assumptions, somehow to avoid lecturing or telling people what the right answer might be, and to facilitate debates about power and fairness. You'll recognize some of the program examples that use group-based critical reflection in their interventions to reduce or prevent GBV. This is not a comprehensive list. Most of these programs use a curriculum with a discrete group of people that meet regularly over time, from anywhere from 14 to up to 40 times. SASA uses problem-posing discussion, not necessarily with discrete groups of the same people over time, but with people who are gathered together in public locations. And the results of these programs are impressive. Research from SASA in Uganda showed that community mobilization can help reduce IPV by 52% over 3 years. In South Africa, Stepping Stones intervention using critical reflection groups reported that physical violence by men was reduced by 38% at 2 years post-intervention. So what do we know about how these interventions succeeded? What happened in those critical reflection groups to shift intimate partner violence in the home? If we want to understand how to best train the facilitators, we also need to ask the fundamental question, what do we hope will happen as a result of critical reflection groups? What's our theory of change? As we recruit and train and coach and mentor facilitators and evaluate, we should be clear on what we expect to happen in such groups. So if you'll permit me, I'll digress just a few minutes and look briefly at 2 educators who've developed key theories about what happens in such settings. And then we'll come back to the practicalities of training and supporting the facilitators. Jack Metzero is an educator in the United States. He coined this term, transformative learning. He defined it as the process by which individuals change their frame of reference, their convictions, and their lifestyle through making meaning from their own experiences. You'll note from this definition that he implies that the learning is internal and focuses on a shift in worldview. From your own experiences, you may recognize this idea. Many people who participate in group critical reflections come to an aha moment or moments when they see that their old assumptions about how the world is are no longer true for them. This might happen little by little or with a big jolt. It's often so meaningful that people want to change something in their own life because of it. I learned a lot from the education research literature on this topic, including some tantalizing insights about how men and women process transformative learning differently that might be relevant to our work. But my question for you is, from your own experiences as a prevention collaborative, are we expecting this as our primary outcome? Is transformative learning what happens in our critical reflection groups? And if so, how do we know that we're successful? The theories behind transformative learning come from the groundbreaking work of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator working with poor children in the 60s. His frame of reference was Marxist, and for him, the goal of education was not knowledge acquisition or behavior change, but critical consciousness. He defined conscientização in Brazilian, which I don't speak Brazilian, so Portuguese, so forgive me, as the ability to intervene in reality in order to change it. You'll see here that Freire went further than the definition of transformative learning in the previous slide. Freire believed that reaching critical consciousness was not only about the aha moment that the individual gets, it's also a collective process of understanding the social systems that disadvantage the poor and the collective ability to do something about it. Note that Freire's definition of critical consciousness implies both an internal worldview shift about the system-wide discrimination issue, but also the collective power to change it. There are a number of researchers who have developed evaluation tools that measure stages of critical consciousness that could be useful to our evaluations of interventions using critical reflection groups, but I don't know of any gender or GBV programs that use them. And if you have insights, please let me know. So my question is this what we in the Prevention Collaborative hope to achieve through critical reflection processes in our work on preventing GBV? We'll come back to this at the end in discussions, so bring your ideas. I've organized the slides in the next section to share insights from the experts by stages of the project. First in the planning of projects, the training of community facilitators, and implementation stages, and in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning phases focused on the role of the community facilitator. So first, in the planning stage, we'll talk about that first. There are many things to consider here. The experts that I spoke with told me about the process of finalizing the curriculum content, the recruitment of the facilitators, how to plan for the tasks they would be expected to do, and all of them, most of them had to reshape their logistical implementation plans from the ambitious ideas they had before starting when they realized how much time it might take to undertake critical reflection groups. I've listed two key steps here in this planning stage. In terms of finalizing the curriculum content, most people urged extensive field testing of the content, including testing the language and the words in local languages. Having community facilitators on board already during this stage can really help them gain a better grasp of the material and methods, but also gain confidence and practice in facilitation. In terms of recruitment, most of the trainers I spoke with had advice about how to locate and screen candidates for the community facilitator positions. Most people started by recruiting people with facilitation skills, if possible, and started by speaking with other NGOs or local feminist groups who had used facilitation approaches in the past for suggestions for names. Some projects I spoke with said they had challenges because they tended to hire ex-teachers, and ex-teachers can sometimes resist the shift from a lecture style mode to a facilitation style. So there are some issues there. And Ritha might have some comments here specifically from Indashikirwa in Rwanda about some of these stages. I'm just going to turn this over to Ritha. And welcome, Ritha.
Thank you, Doris. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share some of the experience we had with Indashikirwa, which was a GBV prevention program for 4 years that combined actually a number of other intervention models, specifically the journey of transformation that was used in Rwanda before, and then borrowed from SALSA, especially on the side of trying to cultivate the activism model. So what we learned from Indashikirwa at the planning stage, it's this need to have enough time to have the module tested. Not only for the testing, but most of the module that we used were developed by experts who were out of the Rwandan context, who might need some insights from people who are using the community needs and the reality on the ground. And these modules were developed in English, and we had to translate them. So for Indashikirwa, we had a very long period. We had a whole year of inception period that included developing the modules in a very participatory way, meaning we had an expert, a consultant hired, but then we had a team of people hired on the program already, like program managers, coordinators already in place to be inputting regularly. We had discussions to say, all right, this is a context, so how can we adapt your very rich content to the context so that it gives the results that we are expecting. So later on, we had some field facilitators, like the facilitators hired, and then they came at a stage where like mostly the content of the module was done, but they were also asked to kind of go through the module and see if it resonated for them. I'll probably talk about the recruitment of those staff later. But what I wanted to focus here is this whole time of people who are going to be using the module, people who are going to be, implementing the project on ground, to have time to go into the whole content, understand it, and later on have time to go and test it. So we had a period of pre-testing. We took the module on ground. We had facilitators, had different sessions with a group of 15 couples. And then we learned a lot from that. The first learning that we had was that some of the words, the terminology was not resonating for the facilitators and for the participants. So we had to note that down. We had a consultant, Erin Stern was there. We had many people observing. We had coordinators observing and noting down everything that we thought was worth going back and look at. And we also noted some reactions, emotions arising from the participants, and we could see that it wasn't something one facilitator could handle. One of the examples is a couple that was living in deep violence that when we started talking about, it was a session about power relations in a couple. So the wife, just burst into tears and she couldn't handle that. So the facilitator didn't know what to do. We, as observers, as people were there, coordinators and program managers, I had to take that wife out and kind of, improvise myself into a counselor, which I wasn't trained to do. So we had that learning and we took that back. And lucky enough, we had that inception period that allowed us to reflect on what could work better. We, for example, learned that one facilitator would not handle a situation like that. So we decided we'll have to hire another facilitator. So all the sessions were later on facilitated by two facilitators. So there had to be two facilitators in a room at any time, apart from the sessions when they had to separate men and women in the curriculum. So we also knew that when we had our facilitators, we did not really think of their ability or their skills on managing emotions. So we had to see how to equip them with those skills, and a training on managing or emotions, psychosocial care was given to the facilitators later on. And the donor or the program people and the donors were flexible people. The donor was, this inception period served as a learning, and DFID, the donor, and Care International had to discuss, and the findings from the pre-test were really taken into consideration, and a lot of things were changed. We reviewed the model, we adapted it to the, to the maximum to be the model we really wanted it to be. So for the recruitment, I mean, I talked a little bit about the recruitment. I could even, when we recruited, one of the things, for example, we didn't consider was the ability of the facilitators to manage emotions. But there are other things that we had predicted. We wanted the facilitator who would not be like a preacher, who would not be lecturing. We wanted the facilitator to be able to, to play the role of a facilitator, to give room to the participants, and to just be there to help the participants reflect, because this is a very rich module in terms of trying to get the participants or people who are going through this training get to go into their inner thinking and know what they could do differently. So Doris, I think for now I can stop at this stage. And if they could, I don't know if everyone can see those slides, but what we did in the recruitment, that is, was differently, because we wanted to make sure that the facilitators will not be those, people with enough knowledge on GBV, gender, and notions of power, but who could give it the way we wanted it. So one of the things that was kind of original in our normal recruitment was to let them role play, let them sit in the role of a facilitator, and the panel and will sit as participants. And we really role played that, and we had a set of criteria we were looking at to know if it was going to be a good facilitation or rather than a lecture. So Doris, I think at this stage I can probably share that. Later on we can discuss more if you want.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much, Ritha. That it just brings it alive when you talk about the realities on the ground and what you had to work with. So I'm going to move on then to the next slide, which is to talk about the training stage. Once the curriculum is finalized and you've got the community facilitators on board, the next step is to try to design a training for those facilitators. And people who've trained facilitators know that you can't just offer the chance to experience the curriculum as a participant and then expect those people to turn around and function well as a facilitator. There are many, many other areas of training that need to be included beyond the content. So the kinds of things that people included in training curriculums for those facilitators, I've shared some of them on the left-hand box there, in terms of facilitation skills, how to manage debate among participants without a script, how to cope with those strong emotions of the participants, how to work not just as an individual facilitator, but how to work as co-facilitator in supportive pairs, how to take care of yourself, and how to continually learn and improve your own method as a facilitator. As Ritha has said, some of the hardest things to learn is how to shift from being a role of a teacher or a preacher to the role of being a facilitator.
Can I? Yes. Sorry. Can I elaborate? I know I talked about this in my previous, but if I can elaborate more, I like I like the fact that we're not transferring any knowledge there, and this was key in our training of the facilitators. But something I didn't touch on was the psychosocial and self-care for our staff as well. I mean, in the facilitators, when we learned from the pre-tests, the incident that happened, we learned that a facilitator would need someone to help when managing emotions from the participants. But later on, as we moved into the modules, we learned from the facilitators themselves that some of the things that they would observe in the sessions were kind of a burden on them, and they were like being heavy on their own social well-being. And this also was later on with the flexibility of the program taken care of. And we had some sessions of well-being, psychosocial self-care, and we called that care for caregivers. So these participants were taken, the participants took the facilitators as their lifesavers. and they wanted to go beyond like that relation of facilitator and participants. And sometimes it was kind of looking for private sessions of psychosocial or emotions management, and it was hard on the facilitators. So we did help them as well with some sessions. We had specialists, specialized people, experts who would come and talk to them. We had number of retreats. And also when we talked about shifting to a model of 2 facilitators per group, sometimes people can feel like it's just the intensity of the module, because this module was really intense. They had to train for minimum of 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, and that for 5 months. So especially that was the primary, because it was very intense, but also having 2 facilitators. In some of they shared with me, as I was the coordinator, they used to share with me that having someone they could lean on, a facilitator, because they were not free to express their emotions in front of the participants. So as they will be debriefing the session, they had like a peer support, even emotionally, not only work related. And I think this is something program people could be thinking about and give importance, because if you think of a facilitator who is in front of people living in violence, and most of these people are married, and some of them will share how they also lived in violence. So it will arouse their kind of, own issues in their families. So they needed each other to help and support. And this was really something I think everyone would think about if they wanted a program that can be, successful.
Thank you so much, Rita. So important. I wanted to add on this slide, one of the most tantalizing things that I learned from scanning the literature about critical consciousness and transformative learning is that the emotional learning is absolutely critical to that process. The research shows that when and how people process deep emotions such as anger or sadness in response to new worldview aha moments that they're having in group sessions, those are pivotal as breakthroughs. Yet I'm not sure that we really understand how to build that into our curriculums, or how we train facilitators to think about the strong emotions not as a necessary bad thing that's going to happen and how to tamp it down, but almost how to anticipate it in a positive way as part of the learning journey, and think about emotional learning as a core piece of the work that happens in these groups. Some of the literature mentioned that women's emotional learning journeys through critical consciousness is really a different journey than men's, but I don't think we have enough data to know how to take that information and build that into our own curriculums or into our own training for facilitators. So some key things that we might need to think about as a prevention collaborative going forward. In terms of the implementation stage, it's really about maximizing the effectiveness of the facilitator skills with using the curriculum. And we need to give the facilitators the tools and the skills to achieve and monitor for those outcomes that we're hoping for. The research literature and the practice-based evidence give us some examples about what's necessary to build that journey, and perhaps we can be explicit in the training for facilitators about what a successful outcome for those sessions is. The text box on the left shows just a few of the steps that seem to be key in achieving positive results. So we know, for example, that group discussions about people's experiences of power is an important step, far more effective than an overview of the theoretical rights that people might have under a law. We also know that getting to know other people with differing worldviews is a critical part of this process. So rather than expecting people to come up with a right answer, facilitators should be prompting debates and welcoming contrasting views. From the research literature, we can also see that critical consciousness is both an internal journey and a group process, and it's possible to gain insights. While it's possible to gain insights by sitting by yourself, it's really more effective to participate in a facilitated group, where hopefully one can find shared values and respect and empathy with others, despite perhaps differing worldviews. So it's important for the facilitator to spend time helping the group gain a sense of their collective strength and commitment to act together to change the situation in their communities. And most project interventions give some time to the stage, but perhaps it's the least amount of time and energy in most program interventions that I spoke with, and Indisha Kirwa is not one of them. They spent quite a bit of time and energy on this step, and I would love to hear from Ritha about what that looked like in Indisha Kirwa and how it turned out in terms of helping the participants in the group think about their collective power as committed activists to change the situation.
Yes, thanks, Doris. I think something that was that came out of this Indisha Kirwa compared to other GBV prevention programs that we are doing. We had programs that were, helping people to understand how they can change the situation, to let people know there are laws protecting them. And we impacted families, yes. We took people through journeys of transformation and we had good results, but that was all. It was okay, people will change, families will be, living in peace, kids going to school, but that was all. So one thing that I learned from Indisha Kirwa was this addition of people's feeling that they needed to give something back to their communities. So, and I think this was really key, because when we do GBV prevention program, when we did GBV prevention programs in Rwanda, we'd have a target, and that target would be, either very ambitious or not, but we did not kind of think of how these people who are called changed people who understood another way of doing things, especially with, as Ramrek, thinking of positive masculine behaviors, we didn't know how to help them help others. So with this Indisha Kirwa model, what the curriculum, we had different curriculums. We had the first one with 22 sessions that talked about different ways of changing the power relation, the power dynamics in the family. And if you look at the module itself, it's really focused on power, and power in the lives of people, and the power in not only the types of power, but the experience of different people with power. So I think that helped us unpack the real root cause of violence, and there was an understanding of, the participants understanding their role in either causing violence or accepting violence on themselves. And this actually was done in a very smooth way, and in a such way that it kind of changed the inner of the person, and showing them that with this, sitting back and looking at their use of power and how power is used on them, they realized they could do something to prevent violence at any stage, no matter who they were in the community, no matter how powerful they thought they were or were not, they realized they could do something individually or together. So, and the way this module was bringing them to realize that, it ended with a kind of commitment. There is a session where they were kind of challenged, we challenged them. So this is the end. Some of them were giving testimony, we've changed, and you could see the change actually from a couple that was not looking at each other in the eye at the beginning, but in the end, going home together, doing some shopping together. So when we reached the stage of what makes a healthy relationship and showing them that they can live a healthy relationship, they said, we just need other people to live what we're living. We know we can do that, something for our community. So the last sessions, asking them to think of what they can do. And I think the last but one session was saying activism means action. They understood it. It means action. Do something. No matter how small it can be, you can do it. Do it. And the model, the ecological model we had was changing at individual level, family level, then community level. So it was brought in a very smooth way. And after the understanding of what activism really means and the opportunities that we could map together in their communities, the community the opportunities to conduct like activism, the last session was to commit to change. And they said, beyond committing to change, let's commit to change others. And we could already see that there were more people committing to be community activists and more people really needing to do something. They started small groups. We just needed to see how we could channel that. But of course, due to limited means, we did not take all the trained people into the next training that was building those skills, because we wanted them to know how to conduct community activism in a safer way, considering every learning that we had from SASA. So what I want to say is this industry curriculum was built in a way that as they go into the self-reflection and understand how they've been causing violence and how they could prevent it and try to prevent it in their own families, they wanted to contaminate the community around them because they understood the impact of violence. So they committed. And I think, as you wrote, Doris, in the right corner, there were more people who wanted to be community activists. And as they understood what an activist could look like, when we went to select those who were going to graduate into community activists and go through the skill building training, participants in groups could point on people who they think will really make better activists, but they just gave us those key words like, we are all activists and we believe we are all activists. And even if you don't train us and we understand, we still can do something to prevent violence in our community. And I think this is really a key learning from Indashikirwa. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ritha. So just on the last phases of the project stage here, just to say a few words about monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And I wanted to reflect the groups back to one of the previous webinars from the Prevention Collaborative. Sophie gave a presentation a few months ago on practice-based learning, and we can see that some of the same principles apply to mentoring of community facilitators. So these might look familiar to you. It's important as we mentor and support community facilitators to create an expectation that learning is core to success and that everyone is a learner, and encourage a culture of curiosity and to build space for collective reflection and discovery, and ensure a safe supervisory environment that promotes trust. Some question guides to use when monitoring for impact. I reviewed all the evaluation and supervision forms that the community facilitators used by the projects in this review, and the summary of these, you can find them in the practice brief. I couldn't fit them onto the slide, but basically the questions that are important to ask during implementation are the facilitation tactics working? Is the content working? And is it actually meeting the needs of the participants? Is it responsive to the participants' needs? Or did we guess that correctly? And is there evidence of success? And just to be clear what we mean by success, and be clear with the facilitators what we mean by success. So practically, how do you ask such questions? The teams I spoke with used some similar approaches, and some of them had to problem solve some of the particular geographic complexities of their own contexts. But basically, most people are asking team members, each member of the team, to take notes of what's going well and what's not working during the facilitation session and share that back with the group. There's regular observation by field supervisors, there's one-on-one mentoring and feedback, and regular group meetings with the supervisors and the facilitators for review of common challenges and group problem solving. And most have created opportunities even for the participants who were in those groups to provide feedback to the facilitators and to the supervisors. And all of these take time, but I really can't overstate how important they are to help hone the skills of the facilitators and the effectiveness of the facilitation sessions. And maybe I'll just make a real quick note here on some of the creative tactics that were used by one of the projects called Change Starts at Home, which was a GBV prevention initiative in rural Nepal. And because they were trying to reach so many groups all at the same time, I think they had 70 facilitators functioning all the time. and they were in really remote areas where it was difficult for the field supervisors to actually visit in person regularly. So they were very creative and made some creative remote reporting and remote meeting tactics. They asked each of the facilitators to take notes on what was going well and what wasn't working, but it was too difficult to send those by email because the web connectivity was too slow. So what they organized is a way for the community facilitators to call a phone number and report their progress by phone, and the phone actually had a recording on it that recorded their report and then transcribed it for the field supervisors to review. So they had voice recognition too. They also recorded some of the sessions actually of the entire session and had those reviewed by the facilitators. So they were kind of honing some of those remote supervision tactics here. All right. So other considerations to think about. I think some of the questions that come up are about the literacy accommodations for people who are not necessarily as literate, both as participants but also as facilitators. Do we need to have a prerequisite for literacy for our facilitators? Of course, as Ritha mentioned, the challenge of translating from English or other languages into local languages needs to be tested quite extensively. Ritha's also spoken about the need for psychosocial well-being and supports for the facilitators and all the team members through the process of this. And I think Ritha also mentioned the expectations of participants. I think every person that I spoke with
Yes.
talked about the challenge of participants feeling so close to the facilitators that they feel like it's almost they're a trusted friend and they can turn into a counselor fairly quickly. So just to try to figure out how to manage the expectations about what's the line between a facilitator of a process versus a trained counselor. And Ritha, do you have anything you wanted to add here?
Just focusing, Doris, focusing on the last point you mentioned about managing expectations of participants. Facilitators were, from my experience, were in a situation where they didn't want to break the hearts of those participants who trusted them. But again, time management and experience and satisfying their demand was really something not easy to do. And what I wanted to come to share with you is the role now of the other layer of supervisors. So facilitators most of the time were on the ground. And I know you talked about the remote kind of, sharing and sharing what is happening on the field. But what I found useful in Nyiratunga was the face-to-face interaction and being there to observe what the facilitators were going through with their own participants and be there for them and give advices on how to do things. These are all things that we cannot predict until we face the situation. So what I did and my colleagues, coordinators did, were to have sessions with the facilitators, ask them to note down what the challenge is, and most of the time were how to manage the expectation of the participants. And of course, we would give some advice because we didn't have any logistics, any skills to manage all the different expectations, because some of them would even expect that the facilitators could help them if they didn't have enough food for the kids. It could even go beyond this emotional kind of support seeking, because in the end, they took them as their friends. So for the program, the advice was finding a smooth way of letting them know that you were there to help, but within the limitations that they could all see. So I think it wasn't really an answer as such, but if I had to reprogram and think about that, probably as we started setting a safe space, would have some of a clear communication actually, because they see us coming with a lot of knowledge, a lot of facilitation skills, and they see us as different people. But if at the beginning, as you set the ground rules and setting the safe space for them to be free, I think there's something that I recognize that we might have missed, of telling them that it's in a safe space, that it's open for them to come to us, to come to facilitators, but set a kind of limitation. I'm open to, to getting your thought on this, but I thought that one was missed, and we kind of put the standards of us being there to help them very high, because people who could see a facilitator as able to change a very bad situation in a family where violence was prevailing into a peaceful family, that person is taken as a lifesaver. So it's kind of, for me, it's important to let them know that there are some limitations at a certain point. So, but the expectations were there, and I totally agree with you with all the other considerations, and even more. I think if we discuss, we can discover that there are other considerations if you want a program to be successful. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ria. I think we're at the end. We can stop for questions for clarification, and then I'll turn it back over to Clara for some discussion.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Doris and Rita, very much. So yes, if there are any questions for clarification, let us know. No questions?
If no questions, we can turn it over to the discussion portion.
They can participants, you can use your voice, right? Sharon has enabled. Okay, perfect. So we had some questions that we would like to discuss, because as I said at the beginning, the objective is not only to consolidate practice-based learning from very experienced practitioners, but share our own, and we might have other perspectives to add to this. So one of the questions is, and Doris was talking at the beginning of the importance of having clarity on what we expect as outcomes of facilitating these critical reflections as a core journey to preventing violence against women and children. So the question is, what would effective facilitation to promote critical reflection on power and violence look like to us, and whether anybody has an experience or a question they would like to share. Okay. Everybody has problems with noise, but don't worry. I guess we are few. So even if I have a lawnmower in my background as well, doing his grass cutting now, so I think we can tolerate some noise. Erin,
can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Oh, okay, great. I guess I unmuted.
Hi, Erin. Yes.
Hi, Rita. Yeah, I mean, I just think a lot of what's been said is really helpful, but I think it kind of sparks the need for maybe even within Prevention Collaborative of having kind of what we think are key principles for effective facilitation, both kind of to guide programmers, but also that they could consider for M&E, so relating to the second question as well, which I think a lot of that has been captured in this discussion. But I think, as you've both mentioned, I think there's a lot of gaps in just terms of the field. I think one of the key ones is thinking about so yeah, I mean, I just wonder if we can think about some of these guidelines or kind of key effective principles. And I think the big thing coming up is, to be participatory, not to be didactic, but also things around ensuring there's, you know, support for people, both in terms of, I really like this point around, you know, we think of it as the content is so emotional or can be very triggering, but also just the process in itself of going through this transformation and how that might then relate to their communities or their partner. I know with Ndashikira, and Rita may have more to say about that, but, you know, a big thing that came up both for even the participants, but also the facilitators was, you know, how transformative this would be even within their own relationships, and how others might perceive them for being different, and the kind of difficulty with that. And like you said, Rita, having that peer support to reflect was really important. But I also think it's where the work with couples was so important, because, you know, as we know, when we go through these changes and our family isn't necessarily supportive, it adds a whole other dimension. Yeah, so yeah, I think this has been a lot of good food for thought. And I think, you know, there is a space for us as a kind of field and then within the prevention collaborative to think about some of these guidelines, drawing on this fantastic research you've done, Doris, and, you know, drawing on practice experience as well, which is really valuable.
Yeah, this has been wonderful in trying to unpack again what facilitating these discussions look like, and how mindful and thoughtful we have to do in supporting organizations that are at the same time recruiting, training, and providing the space and for facilitators to do this very intense work. I have two more questions for you that I would like to read. Do you find there are many differences or difficulties in moving from power in individuals and individual relationships to broader power issues in community? From Kathy. So whoever, Doris or Rita, wants to respond to that.
Actually, I think I would like to open this up to the whole group. If anybody who would like to respond to that.
So maybe as a follow-up, and I guess I have a question, because it's about, Rita was talking about how the last part of the program, the Shakira, was about taking action, and how once individuals, and this is somehow answering to that, but individuals were, after doing their own journey, identifying or understanding how they had used power and experienced it in both good and bad ways, and also giving them a sense of, say, self-efficacy, what they could do to change that, triggered wanting others to experience the same thing. And so having others experience the same thing, and how is this somehow transmitted or shared with the community, is something that I would also be interested to know if others have experience in how this happened. We heard a bit how this happened in the Shakira, but I don't know if others can share how they've seen this outcomes from individual group reflections diffuse or transfer either organically or in a more organized way to the larger community.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Yes.
Yes.
A practical example of what happened in Ndashikira, at the end of the 22 sessions of the core module, the couple curriculum, there was that commitment, and I could call even an excitement of people who committed to give back to the community, because they thought they had learned a lot, and they started identifying people in their communities who were living in violence, but who, according to them, did not get the chance to come and go through the trainings. And in the course of the module, because they will attend a session once a week, take home exercise, like assignment, and reflect on it, they started thinking of how they could use their journey of learning to help other couples that were living with violence. So they started attempting that, go and talk to them, kind of share their own experience with what they have seen in the module. And that was when we were still having the sessions. And of course, this again was something they would come and feedback to the facilitator and kind of report and say, there was this couple that had this kind of problem, either similar to theirs or type of different. And we've tried to take them through these types of power and try to help them understand how they can review the power dynamics, and started small initiatives individually. But in the end, when we finished and said that we were not able to take all of them through the activist skill building training, they said, it's okay, we've got enough, we think, and we can already use what we've learned and what we've lived to go and help other people come out of violence. And they suggested that if their friends, their colleagues, couples were trained to get extra skills, they'll come back and kind of take them through what they learned. And that for me was really strong, because they were so understanding of the budget constraints, but they still expected their peers who went through the activist skills building module to come and feed back to the groups. So at the end, they had already started making some groups, put themselves together to be collecting some money. They started a small, not cooperative, but saving groups, to stick together, because they said, we know if we are together, we can achieve more. So for us, that was already creating a movement, creating a kind of, commitment to be doing something for the community. And this is what happened, actually. We had at least one activist per village. Where we had more, we had 3, depending on how big the village is and how many attended the couple curriculum. But we ended up finding that the trained activists, when they went to facilitate sessions in the community, they were backed up or accompanied by all those, couples in the surrounding who were trained with them for the whole couple curriculum. So this is how it worked. And I think that what we wanted was to ensure the sustainability of this kind of movement that is created. And that was easy because there was this self-commitment that we did not even trigger. I mean, some of them were, created organically, and as you said, I agree, and others were structured, but the structured ones were just in terms of equipping them with skills and giving some of the few materials, posters, to facilitate the sessions. Otherwise, it was rare to see that an activist, a trained activist, is conducting an activity alone. So that support was really key for us.
I think you can learn so much from that history and that experience of Indishikirwa. What Ritha has so clearly said is that we could and should be building in monitoring and tools, both tools and monitoring tools, about solidarity and mutual aid in the process of building critical consciousness and transformative learning, both for individuals and for groups.
Sure.
Just as hard as it is for an individual to go through a process of shifting worldviews when you're living in a family where the rest of your family doesn't understand it or doesn't believe in it, and it's just so much to push against. It's hard for individuals who've been through that and want to make those changes in their communities. It's hard to push against that collective resistance. And so the solidarity and the mutual aid are unbelievably important steps for creating that change. But how do we build the tools for facilitators to help build that solidarity in those groups? And then how do we monitor that solidarity and mutual aid is actually happening? And if it's not, help figure out why and think about how to support that. I think those are really important steps in these processes of moving from individual changes to community changes and building in similar support systems for community change as we do for individual changes.
So on that, thank you very much, Doris. And there's, I think, a question connected to that, and it would be great to, even if it's not in a finished form, but discuss about how we could go about doing it. And Diane says, I would love to hear more about what monitoring and evaluation has been done and whether anyone has developed indicators. So one is on what you just said. I don't know if there were indicators related to this support and solidarity, but even if there weren't, how would that look like, or what could we be on the lookout for? And but beyond that, what indicators were developed for the other outcomes that that the program was seeking to achieve?
Yeah, when I looked in the research literature, I found one study, and it was a qualitative descriptive study from the Stepping Stones intervention in South Africa about how the facilitators felt about their success in facilitating this change process for groups of women and their partners. And most of the facilitators said they felt successful when the participants of the group were active, vocally active. And that was their kind of measure of a successful outcome for their session. And I feel like, we need to be looking at some of the key insights from our experts in the field, like Ritha, who's talked so much about what people actually do and look for and see, and start building better progress measures for these critical reflection groups that actually reflect the kind of changes that we want to see. I'm not sure that we have them necessarily. But I think we could be focusing on that and building that together. Looking at some of the key things that people say as the facilitators and their supervisors and their mentors are supporting them in these processes. I think we should be building it from that, and as well building it from the kind of research tools and evaluation tools that the education literature can provide us too. As I mentioned, there's a couple of researchers who are starting to build out measurement tools for critical consciousness, and those are for individuals, not for groups. So we could look at that and adapt them perhaps for some of the situations that we are working in for prevention of violence.
Because when in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, Doris, you were sharing some question guides to use, right? About are the facilitation tactics working? Is the contact working? And again, one is whether they are active, and it's kind of one sees it, but it's difficult maybe to capture in an indicator. Erin says SASA has some useful monitoring and evaluation tools for assessing quality of facilitation by activists, and it would be also, Erin, I don't know if you would like to share some examples of what of these you found helpful for Indi Shakira that could be also applied to other programs in assessing quality of facilitators in delivering, let's say, the curriculum.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I found they were quite kind of comprehensive in terms of picking out some of these things we've talked about in terms of effective facilitators. So they had things like, asking about the quality of activity and whether people seem to understand it, whether people were engaged, but also the dynamics between the facilitator and the participants and whether that seemed to be kind of respectful and not being didactic and, quite a participatory approach. And then also looking at how people are responding to the discussion or to the activity and if there's anything resisted and just to be able to capture that. I found it's a nice kind of checklist, but also an opportunity to give feedback. And I think they're also meant to be used as a way to give constructive feedback to facilitators. And I think that's an important thing, to reflect on with this work as well. As we all know, this is extremely difficult work. And this, I think that's nice with these kind of tools from SASA or programs like Indi Shakira, which are trying to support, with the activists, people who maybe have much less experience doing facilitation, and especially participatory facilitation. I mean, it relates to, Doris, what you were saying, even for teachers or people that are more used to doing things in a didactic way, to be participatory is difficult and it does take practice. And so these tools seem to be used not only as a way to be able to monitor effective facilitation, but also to give feedback to facilitators in a constructive way so that their skills, improve. So I found it quite a useful tool. And I know SAS has used it for more activists, but I think definitely it could be applied to, facilitators coordinating curricula that we're also speaking about.
Just to add on that, Erin, I think she really captured that, and we were lucky. We got some tools, as she said, brought from SASA, adapted to the industry era, and used. And these were used when we went for any observation. I want to just to focus the fact that these community activists, when they go facilitating, groups of people, these are not experienced. They might have that charisma and have that enthusiasm, but some of the skills that they were, given for 10 days are not enough. It requires more than a 10 days of training. Even 5 days or 8 days of training are not enough. So there is need of accompaniment, at least when they go facilitating, and you have the observation checklist, and you note down some things that you think can be helpful. And there are these feedback, the one-to-one sessions feedback, to encourage them and tell them what you think they could improve, but encouraging them. But also what we did in Nyiratunga was to have, like, on a monthly basis, we had some group meetings where the trainers, those who trained them, were asked to kind of put together all the comments they noted down as they were observing the facilitation in the community, and then give them as a kind of overall remarks or comments, so that what happened to one of the facilitators is predictable and kind of addressed in advance by one of the facilitators. And I think that is a good learning, if there are flexibility in programs, to have all of them together and discuss those general kind of, difficulties that they had, and then give them some hints or, practical examples that can help them handle the situations.
One question I had, sometimes, I don't know, in the experience, Doris, of the different programs, and in the Shakira in particular, Ritha, but sometimes there's this tension between covering the content of a session, which many times is more than the process it takes for participants to engage and have their reflections and aha moments, and maybe detouring and coming back. So how did facilitators feel in terms of being relaxed about letting this process and facilitating these individual processes of reflection, at the same time knowing when they could maybe cut or skip some content if there was an important emotional learning, let's say, going on? Did you feel that this naturally happened, or there were adjustments that needed to be made to allow for this dynamic when finalizing the curriculum and content?
Can I go first, and probably
Please.
Doris, you share the experience of the other context?
Yeah.
So, I think I'm lucky to have Erin here, and I'll go back to the inception period for us. Nyiratunga was really the most thoughtful program I ever participated into. And even deciding the length of the sessions, from the pre-testing, we also anticipated some of the sessions taking longer because of the nature of the session itself and the discussions that it could arouse from that. But that is not enough. The facilitators, the trainers, were aware of the need to give more time to individual reflections than giving the content of the module. And the way it was structured, it had a lot of exercises and a lot of time for people to think. There were particular exercises where participants were asked to just close their eyes and think about their own lives and go take the journey into what they live on a daily basis. So the module itself was designed in a way that would give more time to discussions, more time to participants talking than the facilitator giving kind of teaching or lecturing. So it was good that we had the module was structured, but also that we anticipated sessions length depending on the content and the nature of discussion through the pre-testing.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I also think people start to learn what are the key things that the session is intended to achieve. And it couldn't be a circuitous process, but as long as you are clear on where you kind of want to end up, I think people can really relax with that diversionary process of how it is to get there. I think people who are young in facilitation skills learning tend to be nervous about getting through the materials as instructed, as they're written. But as they gain experience, they really start to figure out how to let some of those go as needed.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was really clear. And we have another question from Sharanya. How did you deal with or prepare for biases and prejudices that the facilitators could bring into the facilitation process? And what stage of transformation were the facilitators in before they began?
I'd love to hear from Ritha how that worked in Indishikirwa.
Well, that would be a tricky one because Erin, you talk about the dropout, because the something that would have helped us understand that the bias would be, let's say, dropout or some negative kind of attitude we'll see in the participants. But when we finished the trainings and had the participants who were going to be the activists, there was this positive energy. I mean, we could not anticipate anything, but there were some cases of people who we thought were really transformed and changed. And I like the question, Sharanya, that some of the few couples went back to be, to live in violence, either because of one reason or another. But that was a very, very tiny percentage. Erin, who did the big part of the MNE, would testify to that. So to say that we could anticipate, it would have been really hard, considering this enthusiasm that we could see, and considering the commitment. It was really not anticipated up until we could see that there are very few, but still possible, people who pretended, let me use that, sorry to you, pretended they have changed, but who didn't actually, because they just fell back to being violent in their own relations. So it's not something that you can predict easily. I don't know, probably I'm open to hear from other people's experience, but from our own experience, all you can see is what you are shown by the participants. And talking from the evaluation, probably Erin will complete, most of them really, once transformed, they were really engaged and they didn't really fall back. And if you say at what stage of transformation the stage of transformation where we could see the transformation, of course there was the what works. Erin, you'd be best placed to talk about this. There was the baseline and there was the midline that talked about the attitudes, what we could see among the participants, but also the testimonies in the couple, the settings. I think the first people who could see a change were the facilitators, the trainers of the participants of the couples. They could see couples who came and most of them were really in violence, not talking to each other, and see those small changes of sharing experience, doing the take-home assignments together, and now being open to share. Because at the beginning, it was really not easy to see people share their own, their personal, lives. So when we saw that they were, moving into being open, sharing, and taking a kind of, repentance and say, the aha moments, we could see the aha moments and say, oh, if I knew, I would have been, I regret my time, and with living examples of their lives. I think we could see that. Of course, I'm not talking from the MNE perspectives, but simple observations and hearing from their testimony. And this happened when they were at least at the fourth session or fifth session, but after they've understood the power dynamics in their relations. So probably I'm open to hearing from Doris, from other settings, and Erin, if you feel free, chip in and tell us, but this is from the program side, the transformation was mostly observed through their change on a daily interactions, yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Can I ask, is the question specific to what are the changes the facilitators go through, and what stage they're at the beginning?
I think so, but Sharanya, could you
okay.
answer your question? Okay, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people that I spoke with said, that's part of the question that you ask at the screening stage when you're hiring facilitators. Like, do you look for people who are already woke to kind of gender and GBV issues already, despite, with or without facilitation skills, or do you look for people with really excellent facilitation skills who may or may not have background or understanding about gender? And I think those are the challenging questions that you, as a program team, go through when you're trying to balance the needs of when you're trying to find a lot of different skill sets among community facilitators. I would say most people said it's mostly helpful to find people who are already woke and they can learn the facilitation skills. It's harder to help people manage that process of kind of learning about gender and GBV while they're, facilitating a curriculum. So from my perspective, speaking to a lot of people who had to make those choices, I think that's where most people came out. And Rita, Erin, if you can share some of your experiences, we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, well, I think I totally agree with you, Doris. And the only additional step that I think helped them, when we realized people were kind of transformed and were really showing some very positive kind of behavior, where apart from the gender GBV, but the multiple sessions on power and the use of power, I think at that stage we could see that they were at a certain really good level of transformation themselves before even thinking of, helping other people to change. So yeah, but as I said again, to know exactly at what stage, I think it's kind of, it varies from different individuals, and we couldn't say all of them were at the same time, transformed and went into showing some. It depends to the level of their understanding and how they were before coming into the trainings, and the nature of the trainings and how it touched the individual's personal stories. And that was, something that I personally didn't measure, but I could just, rely on the observations from the sessions, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think this was a wonderful conversation and giving us lots of insights into how we could support the work of organizations seeking to promote these approaches. And again, then the practice note goes into a lot of detail. We will send the practice note to all of you and to all of the prevention mentors, but some key takeaways discussed today, and that the note goes more into that, are certainly that critical reflection about power is central and core to shifting shared beliefs and behaviors related to gender-based violence. How we talked about how emotional learning is also vital to this process of challenging assumptions and having these breakthroughs on harmful beliefs, how it's not something to avoid and be afraid of, but certainly do think of how to support facilitators and in how to manage it and how to process both their own emotional learning or feelings and others. Another one is how social change programs, as we are seeing that rely on facilitated processes, are Doris said it, I think, as good as the facilitators, and how it's so important to not to underestimate the time and the resources needed to recruit, train, and support community facilitators who are key, integral to this, to accompanying others in this journey of reflection. Actively including them and working with them and to co-create the content of the curriculum, to translate it into local language, pre-testing it, all of this trial and error that programs such as Shakira did with such careful, and it was, I think, a privilege to be able to do it in that way, and having that time, and the results are clearly visible. Another point was that, again, not everybody is suited to facilitate transformative learning processes. Ritha gave us some very concrete examples of how they recruited through these two-step processes, and how to identify facilitators with the values and the skills to lead this work. Also very important to being mindful and plan for a timeline, resources, and that really allows facilitators to master skills that are very complex. And Doris called it in the note the art of facilitating discussions on issues such as power, gender, relationships. Mastering these skills can take a long time. And so it's not just about mastering a task, but facilitator needs to go through this internal process of self-reflection and deconstructing their own beliefs, which takes time. Many times programs just focus on training on the content, but not on having facilitators experience themselves the content as participants before starting to facilitate these on others. I think we talked a lot about planning for, anticipating, and budgeting for emotional and psychosocial support systems for facilitators and participants, and discussing how to set boundaries when cases of violence come up, how facilitators tend to, because of the quality of the work, empathize and thus take too much on themselves, and so therefore ensuring there are robust referral systems for participants who seek help, and so for facilitators to refer them to is also a critical point. And then I think something that I was left to, and we didn't have time to go more into this, but I would like to continue reflecting, is what are the key factors that trigger critical consciousness in a different way for women and men. We know that they might be, they might have this aha moment or click in a different way, and maybe we haven't thought enough, even when we held separate sessions with men and women and then bring them together, how to engage them, and being mindful of the ways in which transformative learning or even emotional learning might be different. And we mostly think of content in pretty similar ways for men and women, and this is something we can, I think, continue thinking and how we include this in our practice. So I thank everybody who participated today, and to our brilliant speakers, Doris and Ritha. It has been really a pleasure. I learned a lot from our discussions and listening to you today.
Pleasure.
Again, this is open to continue. I think you've gave us, as Erin was saying, a lot of food for thought. We'll be sharing this practice note and well, hoping to keep this conversation and channel open.
I hope so. Yeah, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to participate, and looking forward to more conversations on this. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.